in the house. I've been here about 3 months, and I am thrilled to be here. So if you're my neighbor, please come talk to me anytime. I'm here all the time, and we are very invested in being a good neighbor. You know, we really, we don't plan on going anywhere. So it really matters how we get along with all of you. So if you ever need anything, or you have any questions or complaints or suggestions, please don't hesitate to come and talk to me. Yeah, thrilled to welcome the the Vermont Division of Historic Preservation, and thank you to Michelle and Ruth for bringing this to the forefront and really getting this going. And from what I understand, it's been a long road and a lot of work. So this is the fruition right here. Without going too much into detail, I will just give you like the high level history of the house. It was this house, when I say house, I mean the hotel. It was built in 1852. It has been a hotel all of its life. It went through a lot of different owners, and it's famous now, or it's a nonprofit organization now, because Bill W., who co-founded Alcoholics Anonymous and authored the 12 Steps to Recovery, was born here in the front room. And in his autobiography, he famously says that he was born behind the bar, which he actually was. There was a saloon in the front room. Let's see. The house was in disrepair in the 80s, and a man named Ozzie Lepper, who some of you might know if you've lived here a long time. You know, he lived over here in the Griffith house for quite a while, and he had a little farm, and he was a big personality from what I understand. I didn't know him. But he came in the 80s and discovered that the hotel was really falling apart, and so he bought it and he started to restore it with the help of many volunteers. And in 1988, it was formed as a nonprofit organization to preserve this place, and it is, in the 90s, it was designated a historic, it's on the National Register of Historic Places, I should say, because of Bill W.'s childhood. And 36 years later, we're still here doing our thing. We have retreats and meetings, and we welcome community groups to use the space. We have another meeting room up front, which is also available. And we have a Friday night supper every Friday. Anybody can come. The food is really delicious. We just had about 40 people here last Friday, and we had lemon chicken and fresh green beans and rice pilaf and homemade pies, and it was really good. That's by donation, and everyone's welcome. So that's all I've got to say. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Pagan. I'm speaker number 2. Devin, whom you came to hear, is speaker number 3, so I'll keep it short. How many of you have moved here actually since 2016? Yeah, see that? So there's a lot of people who are totally new to living in everybody in East Dorset? Yeah, the newcomers? Great. Well, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Ruth and me and how we got this project started. I'm a native Vermonter. All of my mother's family is buried up here at St. Jerome Cemetery. And I was just saying, we graduated from UVM, and I went straight to New York City and left for 50 years and then came back. And when I came back in 2016, Ruth and I figured out that she probably came at the same time that I left. And so this project really started with Ruth, because she came here with her husband, and she's been talking to people for about 50 years, learning their history. You know, how did they move here? What are their deep family roots here? And she started writing all this down, and she started collecting old photos here and there. For 50 years, this librarian has been doing this. And so neither one of us can remember when she and I met. It was probably at the Historical Society, maybe with John Mathewson on the other side. Ruth is a longtime volunteer at the Dorset Historical Society. I was probably over there researching my house, and somehow we met and started talking, and she started telling me that she had all this information about East Dorset, and what was she ever going to do with it all? And I said, I know exactly what you're going to do it all. You and I are going to team up together, and we're going to get beautiful little downtown East Dorset made into a historic district. And so since about 2017, 2018 maybe, Ruth and I contacted the Division, of course, of Historic Preservation. We got the form, of course. Everything starts with a form, right? And we wrote a little bit of a grant and got a little bit of money to hire a mentor, a historic preservation mentor by the name of Knight. Is that his name, Ruth?
Brian.
Brian Knight, thank you, yes. He gave us the motivation. He gave us the pat on the back to say, yes, you're on the right track. This is a good idea. And so with his encouragement and then getting a little bit of grant money, we proceeded. So Ruth and I have been working on this for, we've lost track. How many? Three?
A long time.
Three?
A long time.
A long time, yeah. And so, so we have lots, as Ruth just said, we have notebooks full of binders full of the files that forms we filled out, pictures that we collected, and I think you all got copies maybe about your particular property, right? Okay, so with that, you're ready to hear about the process, and I'll turn this over to Devin Colman, and Ruth will bring up the end and take questions later on.
All right, thank you, Michelle. And just to re-emphasize Michelle and Ruth's work on this, it has been a long time. My fault. COVID happened. There's a lot going on, but they stuck with it, and thank you for being very patient. So I'm Devin Colman. I'm the state architectural historian at the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation. And I want to start with just a quick overview of what the Division for Historic Preservation does. We are a state entity. We're in the Department of Housing and Community Development, and we run a number of programs that a lot of people don't realize we're behind. A lot of people don't know we have a state preservation office. We have preservation grants that go towards funding projects like this, repairing steeples on churches, a lot of town halls, libraries, basically public buildings, nonprofit buildings can apply for these grants. We do barn grants, which are actually for any agricultural building. Doesn't have to be a barn per se. This, for example, is a sugar house that was restored using a barn grant. So I mentioned these just to kind of plant the seed. If any of you know of buildings that could use a little funding to help get a project going, definitely consider these grant programs. We do a lot of regulatory review. These are for state and federal projects. Some of the biggest, the Waterbury State Office Complex post-Irene. Hundreds of millions of dollars went into this project, state money, federal money, and we were there the whole time helping advise on how to treat these very important historic buildings. And we don't only deal with buildings, we deal with archaeology, below ground resources also. This is a dig that was done up in Swanton along Route 78, part of a road widening project. Again, federal money triggered this project. And they found an amazing Native American encampment site along Route 78 there. So we look at both above ground and below ground. We also run over a dozen state-owned historic sites throughout the state. You're probably most familiar with the Bennington Battle Monument. We own that, we maintain it, we staff it, we run it. We also do the Coolidge Homestead, Plymouth Notch, Chimney Point Tavern, Chester Arthur Birthplace, Justin Morrill Homestead. So these are throughout the state. They're opening up for the season, I believe at the end of this month. So you can go online and see where they are and do some summer trips to visit our state historic sites. And we do the roadside historic site markers, which there's one right outside the front of this building. And I gotta say, Dorset, per capita, you probably have the most markers. I was looking at the list, 5, geez. I mean, Burlington, I think, is up to 20, but that's Burlington. So 5 for Dorset and East Dorset is pretty good. And these are great because they put the history right there for everyone to see and learn about and maybe trigger some interest and do a little more research on a topic of interest. So, and these are throughout the state, north to south, east to west, you'll find these as you're driving around Vermont. And one of the programs that I manage is the National Register of Historic Places. So I facilitate the nomination of properties to the National Register, working with the property owner. Take, for example, the Wilson House, which is individually listed in the National Register. They would come to me. I would help facilitate the nomination process, making sure everything's documented and written up correctly. And then I work with the National Park Service, which runs the National Register program, and get everything to the National Park Service for their review and ultimate listing. So Wilson House is individually listed. The Dorset Village Historic District is listed as a collection of buildings, as a district. And as Michelle and Ruth noted, East Dorset is not. So the goal of this project that we're discussing tonight is not a National Register nomination. We're looking at State Register, but it is, if there's interest, that could potentially be, if you want another project, down the road, another step. So talking specifically about the State Register, it is the same way that the National Register is run by the National Park Service. The State Register is run by my office at the state level, the State Historic Preservation Office. And it's the official list of historic properties that are significant to Vermont's history. And that can be everything from a one-room schoolhouse to an old factory building to a farmstead, post offices, bridges, quarries, you name it. If it's part of the built environment, we look at it and we evaluate it. We compare it to other known property types and try to figure out, okay, where does this example fit within the broader scheme of things? And there are over 30,000 buildings, sites, structures, objects, and districts listed in the State Register. So we cast a very wide net, and that can be everything from a single building to a historic district that might have 200 properties in it. So it's a pretty broad range, and we maintain the State Register, which means we make the information available to the public. It's really meant to be a documentation program. That's the goal, is essentially you don't know what is worth protecting and preserving unless you know what you have. So the first step is to identify and document. And then with that information, you can make informed decisions. If there's a project that might call for the demolition of a building, having the State Register information is great, because you can look at that and say, well, it turns out that's the oldest building in the town. Maybe we shouldn't tear it down. Or it might say, that building was built in 1850, it was remodeled in 1875, 1900, 1950, and 1980. It has zero integrity. It's old, but it's not historic. Take it down. So it's really about decision making. It's a great planning tool to help make informed decisions, because once a resource is gone, it's gone for good. There's no going back. So we like to get ahead of that, have the information available, and that way people can decide the treatment of our historic resources. The process by which something is listed in the State Register begins with survey and documentation, and that's what Michelle and Ruth have been working on, which is going out in the field with a camera and a survey form and just recording information. The building is 2 stories tall, it's colonial revival style, has a front porch, like just nuts and bolts factual documentation. And then the other piece of that documentation is then looking into the history of the building. Why is it important? Is it for its architecture? Is it for who might have lived there? Did it play an important role in the community, the social fabric of the community? There are a number of ways in which a property can be considered significant. Once that documentation work is done, it comes to me at the state level, and I review it, and If I have questions or need more information, we had some back and forth with Michelle and Ruth. Can you clarify this? Can you find a date for this? That sort of thing. And then it goes to the Vermont Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, which is a governor-appointed body that reviews all state and National Register nominations. They look at the materials, and if they have any questions, I'll try to answer them, or I'll reach out to the project sponsors for feedback. Once it's all set to go, the council is the body that has the final thumbs up or thumbs down on the formal listing in the state register. And you'll see at each step in the process, there's public outreach and input. So I know when Ruth and Michelle were starting the project, there was some public information, and certainly out walking around. If I saw someone with a clipboard and a camera looking at my house, I would ask, "What are you doing?" So kind of that talking with community members. The review by the state, that's what we're doing tonight with public outreach and soliciting feedback. One thing that I do want to make sure, since you received copies of the survey form for your property, if you have any edits or comments or feel like, "Oh, I don't think that's quite right," or "Here's something else you should know," tell me. I'd love to get more information when possible. And we want the information to be accurate. So if there's anything you find, just let me know. And then once we get to the point of presenting it to the advisory council, that is an official public meeting. So it needs to be warned in advance. All property owners will be notified and offered the opportunity to either submit comments in advance of that meeting and or attend the meeting. The meetings are held virtually, which is really nice. You don't have to travel to Montpelier anymore to participate. So anyone can log in, observe, comment, join the discussion. So there will be another step in the process for official notification of the final format of the nomination, which is still which I'm still sort of putting together the pieces in the final package. And we'll make that available to all the property owners. So we are at step 2 right now. So a couple of the most common questions and concerns, which are perfectly reasonable, and don't hesitate. Whatever questions you have, ask them. I'm happy to address them. The first is that a concern that being listed in the state register means all of a sudden your property is under massive regulation, and you have to get permission to change a light bulb, and you have to mow your lawn a certain way, and whatever. I've heard it all, and it's not true. So remember, this is state register level, and it does not impose any restrictions on your use, maintenance, or disposition of the property. So hypothetically, we could list your house in the state register, and as long as you get the local permits to do so, you could tear it down the next day. No repercussions from the state level. So it's not meant to be a regulatory action. It's really an honorific designation. It's a way of documenting and recording the history of a place. So that information is in one place where people can access it and understand the heritage and history of where they live. So it is not meant to be regulatory. Where those regulations do come in is at the local level, meaning the Dorset municipality has an option of putting in place a design review or design control district, and Dorset, I forget what they call it. It's a little different. Is it design review? Yeah, so there is, in Dorset Village, a design review district that does regulate what can and can't be done with the property. That is a completely separate process, independent of the state register. Okay, just want to emphasize that because people get really concerned. That is something that has to be written up in an ordinance and passed locally by local voters if there's interest in a design control or design review district. State register listing does not trigger any sort of those any sort of regulations. And that's because in most communities, every community is different. And so we don't want a state level mandate for how people need to maintain their properties. One, because we could never manage that. And two, different communities have different needs and different desires for what they want to do. So all those regulations are really put in place at the local level.
Hey, Devin?
Yes.
Can I add just a quick little factoid?
Yeah.
As you mentioned, Dorset Village has a design and review board for their historic district. In Dorset, there's also the Kent Neighborhood Historic District, and that does not have any review. A lot of
Right.
people who live there don't even know they're in a historic district.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's important to remember that there's 3 levels, state, local, and federal government, and there's 3 levels of historic designation: a local district, state register, and national register. And it's that local register, local district designation that has the regulatory teeth, if you will. So in terms of process, how does a district get put together, and what is a district? Basically, we define it as a concentration or grouping of properties and resources that are historically related to one another. Geographically, they're clustered together, and they have some sort of common through line of either architecture, history, cultural significance. Usually for villages, it's kind of a no-brainer to do a little historic district because you have a cluster of industry, stores, houses, hotels, churches that really tell the story of a community through its architecture. So some of the resources that are out there are historic maps. And these are a great starting point to figure out, okay, what was here in 1856? And then ground truthing to see what's still here today. Yeah?
Devin, I just want to point out that the proposal is for East Dorset Village Historic District, not...
Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, East Dorset Village Historic District. So here we see kind of the general study area. And then you kind of move through the maps. This is apologies, this is the 1879 Beers Atlas, not the Walling map. So by comparing maps from a few decades apart, again, you can see like what was there, what changed, what appeared in between, and then again, ground truthing it with what's there today. And historic photos, photos like this are just a gold mine for historic researchers because you can pick out the buildings, we're here, and you can really figure out where things have changed, where things are the same. It's amazing in some Vermont towns. You look at an aerial photo taken 150 years ago, it's like pretty much the same today. It's pretty cool. But this is another great way to figure out where buildings have been added since this photo was taken, what's been lost, a lot of this foreground industrial infrastructure, and outbuildings, things like this. There's some sort of little shed here behind the church, may or may not still be there, but it's a great way to again, kind of ground truth, walking around today with a picture in your hand and figure out how things have changed. And then with that information, you can kind of get a general sense of what the boundaries of the district might be and where to focus your efforts. The nice thing with a district like this is that there are pretty clear demarcations of when resources start to spread out and you start losing that district cohesiveness. So this is the general study area map that Michelle and Ruth put together to focus their survey work on. And it's a really nice, cohesive grouping of buildings. And then don't try to read this. This is just for illustration. So every building within this area, Ruth and Michelle filled out the survey form with kind of and you should have, if you live in the district, received a copy of this. Basic information about building materials, style, number of stories, additional architectural description, and then the historic information and a location map, and then some present day photos, and in a lot of cases where possible, a historic photo as well, which is again a really nice reference point to see the old and the present. So every building has a survey form like this. And with this information, then what I do is review this, look at the building, look at the pictures, and working with Ruth and Michelle, figure out, okay, does this property contribute to the historic significance of the district? And in this case, we're looking at the history of the village is one area of significance, and its architecture is another area. So it's not just about pretty buildings. I often tell people it's about historic buildings, and history isn't always embodied in the architecture. It can be embodied in the place itself and what might have happened there or who might have lived there over the centuries in many cases. So figuring out the significance of a property, and within this East Dorset Village Historic District, they documented 41 properties, and these consist of what we call contributing and non-contributing properties. And for example, of a contributing property, the church across the street, historic photo, present day photo. I mean, it's pretty much, churches are nice because they don't often get radically altered unless they're demolished. But this is an example of, it has historic integrity, architectural integrity, it's significant to the community. This would be a contributing building. On the other hand, in most districts, most if not all districts, there are always properties that are either more recently built. Our rule of thumb is 50 years old or older. That's not a rule, it's a benchmark. But generally speaking, a house built in 1985, it just hasn't been around long enough to really contribute to the history of a place. One example of that would be, say, the town office building. This is what it looked like in 1965 when originally built, and that's what it looks like today. So this little building is still in there, but you know, if you look at these windows and the door, that is in there, but it's been radically altered. So they've changed the roof orientation, they've added a whole upper story, it's been expanded out the back. So this is one where it's pretty clear it does not have architectural integrity. It is no longer represents the original building as designed. And these changes are all recent enough that they haven't gained significance in their own right. So they're still new enough that this is one that is non-contributing. So, but it's still documented because it is part of the community, and it's really important in a district to have both positive and negative information, so that I think there is a plan to build a new town office. Is it? Yeah. So if this is coming down, yes, fine. You know, it's not a historic issue. So that's where having this documentation can really help. Is figuring out, you know, what should we do with this building? Is it historically significant? In this case, pretty clear, nope. So with that, I would love to open it up to questions, discussion, concerns. The floor is yours.
I want to let everybody know there's cookies and tea in the back as well. So if you'd like a refreshment while we have our discussion, please help yourself.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I know you said if it's registered with the state's not going to try to tell you you can't change your
Right.
house or do things, but the design and review board could. So if this area does become a historical area through the state, would the design and review board be more likely then to make more restrictions?
They can't simply by virtue of it being a state register district. That doesn't trigger their authority. They would need to create a locally designated historic district and say within this boundary, the design review board has authority. That locally designated district might be the same as the state register district. It doesn't have to be. In some cases, there might just be a really small grouping of properties that there's interested in local control over. But simply by virtue of being in the state register does not give the local design review board authority.
Okay.
And it also would have to be a zoning change and voted on by the public.
Yeah, so
To
there-
make anything in the area a historic district, which would have any controls on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like in Dorset, you know how everything has to be white with the green shutters? How did that happen?
That's because it's zoned, the town zoned that village as a historic district, which then triggers in the design review board, just for that area.
The voters voted
Yeah,
That's correct.
yeah, it's a local
Yes, that's
decision.
correct.
locally, so we would be in the same situation here, so that was to
Right.
happen, it would be a voting list.
Yes,
Yeah,
We wanted that to happen.
exactly.
correct.
So
We can
that
all be
triggers a good
ignorant.
question, the whole issue of exterior paint colors, Devin, like you just asked, over there, the issue of paint colors,
Yes.
all those houses over there are white with green shutters, and they have to stay.
Right.
So what would happen here?
Whatever you want.
If the people over here voted that they
Right.
wanted a design district here, that would have to be voted in. Everybody would have to, what would happen to paint colors then?
It's totally up to,
I guess
it's,
what they decide.
it's up to whatever the local community wants to put in place.
Up for vote.
Like over
Yeah.
there, I know at the time that that nomination was made, it was back in the 80s, like 85, and all those houses were white with green shutters at that time.
Yeah, so they wanted it to stay that
I
way.
think so,
Yeah.
yes. But I think over here, wouldn't it be cool if these all went Victorian colors? Well, I have a question
Yes.
actually, and it doesn't even concern this district, but one of my neighbors was just asking me this morning. He said, you know that little schoolhouse out there on Route 7 that's falling apart? Do you all know the one I mean?
The red one on the
North Dorset, it's actually North Dorset.
Right.
He said, can't anything be done to get that property and preserve it somehow?
Roof is caving
What can he, and then we've got the
I've
North
talked to
Dorset
the
train
owner.
station
It's-
on the other side of the
Yeah.
road too. So two pieces of history really going to rack and ruin.
Yeah, they're in private hands,
Yeah.
and it's really up to the property owner to decide what they do or do not want to do with the property. I think that's a good example where both of those buildings are listed in the state register.
They are?
I believe
Are
so.
Wow.
I know at least the schoolhouse is. I think that,
Oh, I don't think so. I think I checked that.
did you? Okay, because I know I've talked to the owner of the schoolhouse. Is she still living there?
No,
Or is it
no,
vacant?
she's been,
Yeah.
and the son is there, but.
Okay. But yeah, the state register listing doesn't impose any sort of state authority to say you must do X, Y, and Z. It's really up to the property owners.
Well, I know that there's been conversation within the historical society about those particular buildings and what can the historical society do, and again, it's little.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, right.
question in back there?
No. I mean, as long as we're asking questions, is there any sort of tax incentive to living in a historic district?
I wish. In some states there is.
Can't
It's
say
not in
100%.
But I'm glad you mentioned that because that's another common concern is that if your property is deemed historic, suddenly your taxes will go up. Not true. It has nothing to do with tax assessment values. It also has nothing to do with insurance. You do not need to get a higher level of property insurance or maintain a certain level of insurance. Totally separate from any sort of state or national designation. So those are two other concerns people often have.
We didn't even need a designation, our taxes went up.
I know, see, they'll do it anyways.
I guess along those same lines, have you noticed any correlation between property value and a historic designation across the state?
Nationally, I think they have seen some increase in property values in designated historic districts. We really haven't seen it in Vermont so much that I'm aware of, just because we're so small. We're not Beacon Hill in Boston. So it's so I wouldn't say in Vermont that it's really been a big factor. Yeah.
You mentioned that we're at step 2 of the timeline?
Yes.
So what is your estimation of the timeline?
So I would say, I know. So we're, based on this meeting, if there's any feedback on the survey forms, I'd want to get that information, incorporate it, and then working with Ruth and Michelle, I think we're pretty much there in terms of the boundaries. Sometimes there's a little wiggle room of, let's leave that one out, but I think we've got a pretty good boundary established. And then basically it's getting all the materials put together for presentation to the advisory council. Knowing their schedule, I would shoot for in April. They meet once a month, and their agendas. I would shoot optimistically to get it at the July meeting. With the chance, they do not meet in August, with the chance that it might be pushed to September, because we never know what else might come up between now and July that they have to look at. But that would certainly be my goal, because I don't want to stretch this out any longer. You've been so patient. So. Yes. Yeah. So I would be presenting it, and certainly would want Michelle and Ruth on the call to answer any questions. And like I said, any other members of the public, it's a public meeting. Anyone's welcome to join in and just observe, just listen, or if you want to participate, welcome to do that as well. Yeah.
Do we get our own plaque?
Plaques. We do not supply plaques, unfortunately, but that is something that some districts, some communities, once they're designated, do come up, can work with the local sign maker on a design, a pattern for a plaque. And then sometimes if there'll be a volume order, the sign maker might say, I'll give you a discount on these if you can.
No, like a big one. Like there's one outside the Wilson House.
Oh, like yeah. I was thinking of the little plaque on the house. We typically don't do the roadside markers for districts. They're more for specific properties, calling out history related to a property.
But just say that from the get-go, we've engaged the support of the Select Board and the Historical Society.
Mm-hmm.
So hoping that we will be able to put up a East Dorset Village historic sign.
Yeah, what a lot of towns will do is at the main entry points to the district, put up their own, a wooden sign or something that says, entering East Dorset Village Historic District. And that's a really nice way for visitors to understand, there's something special here. Yeah.
So if this was designated historic, would that maybe help light a fire under the state's ass for all the water issues that we've been having in this town?
I like that one.
It's
That's a good question.
yeah, in terms of flooding.
Honest question.
Yeah, flooding or just general.
Flooding, you name it.
No, that's a
Groundwater's
great
changed
point,
so much around
because
here.
it does, if you're dealing with FEMA, which we actually just had closed out the last Tropical Storm Irene project when the July flooding hit. So we're like, God. But being designated in the state or national register under the FEMA regulations does kind of bump you up and give some allowances in terms of the types of mitigation projects that can be done and how much attention is given to a community. It does it can help to be designated historic. Yeah.
That'd be super helpful.
That's the most valuable
Yeah.
thing I've heard all day.
Yeah. Yes.
So far, we've talked about architecture and stuff. Does the land go with the historic designation?
Yes, yeah, so, and with the district especially, and especially in East Dorset, you've got this amazing streetscape of the marble sidewalks and the really, on one side of the road, the really broad green strips, which is unusual. It's a little different planning system than many towns have. So that's noted in the write-up about the general district description. Is definitely those landscape features, and also part of that general description of the district is how consistent the placement of the buildings is in terms of setback from the street, spacing from each other. It's just a really nice rhythm of how it's developed over the centuries, to have just a really nice rhythm to it and cohesive layout. So yeah, definitely that physical setting, the landscape setting is part of it.
So if you wanted to divide a lot, say, that other half of the lot would now remain historic district?
Yes, it would be physically in the district. If it doesn't have a building on it, then there's no building to list, but the property itself would be physically in the district. And having the district information could help if there's something to be built there. You could kind of look at the streetscape, look at the district documentation and say, okay, well, let's maintain the setback. That's an important quality of this part of the village. Let's look at the height of the surrounding buildings, so it can be a guide in some sense of how to build something new, and new buildings are fine. Where the purpose of a district designation isn't to freeze East Dorset in time and try to pretend it's 1850, like it's 2024. We all are, you're living here, you're working here. So there will be change, and change is part of a community, and having that district information can help inform how that change takes place.
Does zoning regulations have to conform to the historic district?
No, the zoning are local level legislation, totally separate from the state registered designation.
I can see how they might be in conflict. Well, zoning requires you get permits for building in accordance with the zoning.
Right.
But if you don't want to destroy the historic value, then you can't make modifications to the outside of structures anyway.
It depends on what the zoning ordinance says. You can or can't do. And that's where having a locally designated design review district comes into play.
Yeah, but we don't
So-
have one.
Right.
So who will rule it?
It would be whatever the zoning ordinance permits.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just point of information, down the road, we are going to do a couple of presentations in the next few months. One, we'll do a history, a walk, a East Dorset walk, which I've done in the past several times, and then we'll also preference that by a presentation of the history of the area. What makes this area significant, and I don't know if Michelle hit on that, was the marble industry and the arrival of the railroad in 1852, which was the impetus for the growth of this whole area, was the marble industry and all this port that happened relative to that. And if you look at your own, your write-ups and your, that each of you have, you will see that marble was a factor in almost every single property. Foundations reflected in who occupied that property, probably all workers in the marble industry, etc. So keep an eye out for that coming soon.
So maybe one more question, Devin. The village actually was developed after and when the railroad came through. So we have a lot of houses here in East Dorset that are actually older than the ones here in the village. Do you want to say a word about, can people get an individual old house recognized?
Yes,
as
definitely.
You want to say a couple
Yeah,
words
yeah,
about
so
that?
we've been talking about the district approach, but certainly there's plenty of properties where it's not part of a district grouping, it's just a single house, and we can absolutely do individual nominations, state register listings, national register if appropriate, for individual properties, looking at the same qualities of significance for history, association with an important person, architecture, and documenting why that property is significant. But yes, we can do individual listings as well.
Yeah, I'm sure you've all noticed the Frost, well drilling company and beautiful house there, that beautiful yellow house. That's what I'm thinking of. As you're leaving here, Devin, on,
Yeah, oh,
on
that'd
the
be-
west side of Route 7.
Yeah,
Beautiful
perfect.
property up there.
Any other
Any more
questions or? And I'll be around for a little while if anyone wants to speak directly, or if you have any comments on your survey form or any information. And also,